Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Figures on net migration, that's the difference between those coming to live in the UK and those leaving, show that numbers from the EU have fallen to their lowest level since 2012. But the figures from the Office for National Statistics also show an increasing number of people from outside the EU are coming here to live. Daniel Sanford reports now from Peterborough.
Peterborough Cathedral has stood for 900 years, its bells marking the passage of time. But the city has changed in the last 15 years. Large-scale migration from the European Union meant the population of Peterborough grew by more than 30,000. It has helped employers like the Filia Lodge residential care home.
Oh, it's lovely.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. It's lovely.
Manuela, who's from Romania, moved to Britain 1 month after the Brexit vote. She was one of 35 staff the owners hired from Romania that summer.
For me, it's better here now. I don't know. Here is my life, so I decided to stay. Even my daughter, she wants to come here, so I'm going to be more happy.
But since the Brexit vote, the company has struggled to keep and recruit EU workers, with far fewer hired this summer. And with the relatively low pay and high responsibility, they can't find enough British citizens to do the work.
But we can't.
It's a huge problem for the care sector.
Nothing is certain about where we are going to get staff from, because inherently we cannot get the younger British people coming in to this industry.
Net migration from the EU, that's the number arriving minus the number leaving, has fallen to 74,000. That's the lowest in 6 years. But net migration from elsewhere in the world has risen to 248,000. That's the highest since 2004. So overall net migration is actually fairly stable at around 273,000. But what do Brexit voters in Peterborough think about EU workers being replaced by workers from elsewhere?
So just this wonderful country that we have been civilised for lots of years, it's just been absolutely destroyed.
At the end of the day, we need people coming into the country because there's a shortage of labour on various aspects.
While arguments over what Brexit should look like rage in Westminster, out in the country the migration dilemma doesn't become any easier to solve. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, Peterborough.
And the government's received a blow as it prepares to publish its long-awaited immigration plans. Figures showed that although far fewer EU nationals were coming to the UK, the numbers of non-EU nationals arriving is at its highest level for 14 years. And that's despite Britain being able to limit those numbers. Businesses are concerned about how they'll find skilled workers. Our political correspondent Paul Brand reports.
At Birmingham's Christmas markets, a toast to the best bits of Europe. These stalls come to make their money, then pack up and go home. Our EU workers beginning to do the same. At this cafe, they've got a problem with their Italian blend. The authentic staff they seek no longer want to stay.
You make us feel, guilty when we just came here for working. We pay taxes. The way, the people talk to you, some people just, makes you feel like you're not welcome, literally.
And you think that's worse since the referendum?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
The owner now gets half the applications she used to and can't find the skills she needs.
In the past, we had a large pool of Italian applicants, roughly about 60 per advert. At the moment, that number seems to have gone down, and I'm only getting about 35 people applying for the job who are actual Italians. And also, anecdotally, a lot of our staff have moved back to Italy.
Since the EU referendum, overall net migration has stayed fairly stable. But breaking it down, net migration from the EU has declined sharply. Today it hit its lowest level in 6 years. At the same time, net migration from outside the EU has risen, now the highest it's been since 2004.
The UK is an ageing population. It needs migrants. It needs migrants to fulfil essential services. If we find we're not fulfilling jobs through EU migrants, then we need to look elsewhere.
After Brexit, the rules will be the same for EU migrants as those from the rest of the world. quarter of the builders on this site are European, the boss says they should get preferential treatment because there's little point looking anywhere else.
How easy would it be for you to find these kind of skilled labourers from outside of the EU?
I suspect it would be extremely difficult. Do they actually exist? So if you're in an economy where the construction of your indigenous buildings is not as we have in the UK, then the skills won't exist anyway, because you won't be laying bricks or putting up plasterboard or wiring up light fittings and all that sort of stuff that goes with that. So that is a huge, huge issue for us.
An economy built on EU migration in recent years may need some serious reconstruction. Paul Brandt, IT News, Birmingham.
Now, net migration into the UK from the rest of the European Union is continuing to fall, according to government figures out today. The total number of people coming into the country remains pretty much unchanged, though, with more Asians making their home here. So is this the start of the Brexodus? Our economics correspondent Helia Ebrahimi reports.
Today's figures show the biggest exodus of Europeans ever recorded by the Office of National Statistics, putting pressure on huge swathes of industry, from construction to nursing to food processing and hospitality.
Give me just please.
Tony Keaters has a chain of 35 restaurants with more than 1,000 staff, half of which are European. He says he's worried about trying to grow a company at a time when good workers are disappearing.
Because we have less people coming through. Recruitment is becoming even more challenging than it used to be. So we don't have as many people coming to apply. We cannot replace people. It's people that cook, it's people that look after you, it's people that smile at you. So for us, it's very, very, it's a worry.
You can see the stark drop in immigration from the EU with the blue line, showing that numbers have dropped by a quarter since the referendum. In the orange line, you can see not only are there fewer EU citizens coming, but now they are leaving at the fastest rate in 10 years. These two trends mean that overall, net migration has now fallen by 60% since the referendum.
Well, you reduce growth, you reduce the number of people in jobs, you reduce tax revenue, and you reduce how much the economy produces. I think it is very odd that simply because you want fewer immigrants, you would be prepared deliberately to make yourself poorer, to reduce the quality of your public services. But some people appear to think that's what we voted for. Maybe it is.
But have a look at this graph. The blue line shows the fall in EU immigration. But in green, you can see that non-EU immigration has actually increased to levels not seen since 2004.
In a way, this is the worst of both worlds. An exodus of workers from key industries, but at the same time a failure to curb immigration, one of Theresa May's cornerstone promises.
But David Goodhart, the author who's been critical of free movement, says today's figures are good news.
The problem with EU immigration has been it is so indeterminate, and it's that kind of uncertainty and indeterminacy about EU free movement that I think has made it very unpopular. With people coming from outside the EU, we have much more control over who comes. They come here for a limited period of time on a visa, and then usually after a certain period of time they go home.
Goodhart has little time for company complaints about European workers leaving. He says in the end it's better for the country.
We have given employers a huge free lunch in the last 15 or 20 years, talking about, in Marxian terms, about a kind of reserve army of labour in Eastern and Central Europe.
The question is whether there's an army of British workers at the ready to fill these jobs, or whether we're just hurting the economy and making us all poorer.
Well, joining me now in the studio is Madeleine Sumption, Director of the Migration Observatory. Now, her research focuses on the role of migrants in the labour market. First of all, do we know anything about why the numbers of Europeans has dropped off so much? I mean, are they feeling unwanted, disliked?
We know that there are fewer people coming here for work. It's difficult to unpick exactly why, although it's likely that the exchange rate plays a role, the fact that money earned in the UK is worth less than it was before the referendum. And it's possible that the uncertainty around Brexit and future status of people coming here has had an impact, but it's difficult to unpick.
Because the numbers leaving has gone up as well, and I suppose that might be because the value of the pound.
It could be because of the value of the pound. It could be because economic conditions in many of the main countries of origin have improved over time.
So what does this mean for job vacancies? I mean, presumably, if non-EU migration has gone up, those people who are coming here to work are going into sort of specific jobs from which there are shortages. Is there a straight swap between the non-EU migrants and the EU migrants? Or are they filling different jobs?
The profile of jobs that EU and non-EU migrants fill is slightly different. So non-EU migrants, on average, tend to be in slightly higher skilled positions. Many of the people coming in under the visa system are specifically being sent to very highly skilled jobs.
So they are the skilled migrants that the government says it wants?
Many of the non-EU citizens are, yes. And of course, on both sides.
Aren't a lot of them family as well?
Yes, so on the non-EU side, actually the biggest single reason for immigration is international study. And so you have students, a small number of whom enter the labour market, family members, skilled workers. So there's a real mix. I think it's difficult to kind of treat this as just a monolithic category on either side.
But if this trend continues, does that mean we're likely to see shortages of unskilled labour in things like fruit picking and some of those jobs that EU migrants have filled?
It's really difficult, actually, to say what the right amount of immigration is. Now, from employers' perspective, obviously they welcome having larger numbers of people in the labour force. A lot of the research, though, on looking at what are the impacts of this, either for workers or for the economy as a whole, find that the overall economic impacts of migration are actually not as big as many people expect.
I mean, some people think that this will mean wages have to go up to attract people in Britain to those jobs.
Interestingly, the research does not show that immigration has a big impact on wages either way. There are some groups who are affected in the bottom, kind of 10 to 20% of earners, and who could benefit in the short run if there was much lower immigration. But the research really does suggest that the immigration is just not a major factor that's determining how well those people do in the labour market.
But broadly, do you think this is a trend? EU migration going down, non-EU migration going up? Or is it just...
Immigration levels actually fluctuate unpredictably in these sorts of ways. Very difficult to know. Obviously, the big wild card is policy, what will happen in the future. And if we do have much more restrictive immigration policies to EU citizens, then you would kind of expect to see that trend solidify.
Madeleine Sumption, thank you very much.